we're going to have a go at refurbishing one of these air filter housings in an SL. They're a very common rust area because they get moisture inside and tend to rust out the bottom. This one here has got the first signs of corrosion just here. So we're going to take out the inner mesh, and to do that there's two screws here, the little Phillips screws like this, and they have a little spring washer on, don't lose that. Once you've done that, you have to kind of spiral this and twist it out. Once you've done that, this should pull out. It's difficult to do with one hand, I'll just do that off camera. Okay, so yeah, you have the inner mesh, and this is pretty typical. This is from a 1975 SL, but every other SL I've seen up to 83 always pretty much looks like this, and often these are completely rusted out inside. We're going to go and empty out all of that junk and see what we're left with. By the looks of it, there should be some kind of foam or sponge inside there. I've never seen it before because it's always disintegrated, but that's what all these remnants here are. Unfortunately, these aren't available anymore, and this bit isn't available anymore. The only thing you can still get is the rubber buffers, which do tend to split and perish, as you can see there. So it's a matter of refurbishing this. Take this air filter unit here off to the powder coaters. This bit here, I don't know, I might see if I can get that CNC'd somewhere. I suppose you could possibly see if you could actually make that up yourself by drilling 10 million holes. I'm not sure. It's obviously not something you'll ever see where it's all corroded here, but we'll see how bad it is after we've got all the rust off. The common problem is that these anti-vibration bushings perish like that, so they basically screw off, and on this particular car there's one on each side. You just need to get a set of mole grips around there and they'll screw off. Before we give this to the powder coaters, we're going to get rid of this rubber bushing here, but this nut is refusing to move, so we're just going to give it a blast with our hot rod induction torch, heat that up and hopefully get that off. That did not want to come off. We got there in the end. That metal disc just basically glues inside that rubber, so we should be able to get this off now and take it. Oh, that's hot. To take this down to the powder coaters. I did before, but I'm impressed with that hot rod for getting nuts off. You wouldn't really be able to heat that with a blowtorch because of the rubber on the back would catch fire and melt, but with the hot rod you can just heat the bolt without melting the rubber. I just got a call from the powder coaters. They've sandblasted this, but there is a problem with it, that once you sandblast things, you often reveal a whole plethora of other problems, and in the case of this here, it has a whole series of holes around here. Now, a friend of mine has just welded a patch on here where it had a big hole, and it's pretty usual for these to be rusted out because they sit like that, moisture gathers inside them, and they rust out. But he wasn't able to weld up these holes here, so I'm going to try and fix those holes myself. Now, call me a crazy fool, but the way I'm going to try and do it is to cut out a ring of metal that is going to sit there, and then I'm going to panel bond that in, and I think that's going to be better than trying to spot weld, or not spot weld, but weld up all of these holes. I don't have a welder ever since somebody stole mine, unfortunately. So here's my plan. First of all, this bowl here is exactly the right diameter. Got a leftover bit of steel here from where we were repairing our other 280 SL. There we go. Now I'm hoping that I can use tin snips to cut this out. Failing that, we'll use an angle grinder. The difficulty, of course, will be cutting out the internal bit so it fits exactly on there. So the good news is these shears are cutting through this steel without any problem at all. That was the easy bit. Now we just have to cut out the internal ring, which I suspect will be considerably more difficult and tricky, but we'll give it a red hot go. Now what we'll do next is just get two bits of wood here and here so I can exactly measure the diameter of this and compare it to the diameter of this, just to make sure that we are somewhere close. Just made a little cut in there with the angle grinder, and hopefully that'll allow us to get these snips in there and snip that circle out. To cut out with there, remarkably easy. It just remains to be seen whether we cut it out correctly. And whilst not 100% perfect, that is looking pretty good. We will panel bond that down there, then we'll sand the edges flush, and the panel bond will act both as a waterproof sealant and obviously save us having to weld that down. So the idea is we are going to clamp this ring down here really tightly to here. We've got a couple more of these 50 kilogram pull magnets, and then we'll use these little ones in the middle. We don't want them too close together, otherwise they'll be attracted to each other. And we'll just put some of the 3M panel bond underneath there. That will squeeze into any gaps and hopefully give us a nice finish. And when that's all powder coated, it'll look almost as good as new. Now, when we use this 3M panel bond 08115, it's important that we're gluing shiny metal to shiny metal. So we've gone over this with a wire wheel, and we've gone over this with a wire wheel. Now what we're going to do is just cut a thin strip off a blank sort of plastic credit card here, and we're going to put a primer coat of the 3M on first on that side, and we're going to do the same on this side here, a thin primer coat, and then we'll put a thicker bead on. First off, we're going to take the cap off. Now, my experience of this 3M is that it lasts a remarkably long time. I opened this over a year ago. We've used it several times in that period, and it's always been great. Now, we've hardly got any left here, so I'm hoping there's going to be enough both to do this job and to fill this tube. The downside of this 3M is you always waste what's in this tube. This tube basically mixes both of these compounds together in the right proportion. Do first is just squeeze out a little dab just to make sure that it's mixing, which it is. Then we'll do a very thin bead round here. This, as I say, is the primer coat. You want this to be nice and thin. I've cut this little plastic spatula so it's exactly the right width, which hopefully will aid us. Now I'm going to put on the thicker bead. I'm going to put it on this side here because the other side's got quite big holes in it, and it's important that you get the squeeze through, or the squeeze out I should say, to cover all gaps so there's no air gaps. I've laid that ring on and I've marked where I want it to go. Now I'm just gonna pin that down with some of these super strong magnets. Start off with the opposite sides. That is gluing with as many magnets and clamps as we can muster. It'll actually be dry in the next few hours, but we'll leave that overnight and come back and sand the edges smooth, and that should be job done and ready to go back to the powder coaters. Next morning, and all we have to do is carefully separate these magnets so as not to trap our fingers in, and hope we haven't actually glued any of the magnets to there. Purposely cut that ring big here, so all we have to do now is get an angle grinder and grind this down so it's now flush with here. So there's about 1 millimeter to grind off. It's quite thin steel, so it shouldn't take us too long to do that. We finished sanding all of that down, angle grinding all of that, and though I say so myself, that's come out pretty well. Now you could run a line of JB Weld in these tiny little gaps here if you so desired, but bearing in mind this is never going to be seen, I don't think we'll bother doing that. What we'll do is just get a chisel and just get rid of this little bit of excess glue here, but by the time you've powder coated this, these little joints here will be completely covered, and that will be almost as good as new. Just picked these pieces up at the powder coaters, and once again they've done a fantastic job for us. You'd have to look very, very closely at this to see that it ever been repaired. As I say, once that powder coating goes on, this little repair we've done is practically invisible, and it will be hidden like that, so you'll never see it. Now, the other thing we've done is had this internal piece made up in a metal shop. I did this almost a year ago, and it's interesting to see that the first signs of rust are just creeping in, and this has just been stored in my bedroom, or our bedroom, much to my wife's annoyance, I should say. So what we will do is we will bend this in and then just make these bends here, drill these little holes, make the little bends there, and then put that back in there. That'll be ready to go back on the car. We just need to get one of these little bobbins as well, and of course an air filter. We can fit this into the air filter. We've got to put in these little bends here. So we're just going to use this little bit of I-beam to do that and do the double bend. We don't have exactly the right tools to do this job. It can be a bit tricky. That second bend, because it's bending out that way, I can't be hitting on the edge here, otherwise I'll ruin that bend. So I'm just using an old piece of broomstick here that we used to make up some of our seat covers, just to get that bend in there. That is not perfect, but it's pretty darn close to what we're looking for. Do a couple of similar bends on this side and we'll be done. Well, that was not a 5-minute job getting those curves in, but I think we've done it, and we're ready just to drill these 2 holes, and then we'll rust encapsulate the whole thing, and it should be ready to go back into the air filter housing tomorrow. Now this piece of metal is not symmetrical. It's shorter on one end and longer on the other end, and the shorter end is the bit that basically will go inside and attach to these 2 holes here, and the longer end will come out of this space here and attach to those 2 holes. So it'll fit in there, and then you'll be able to snake it round like so. But before we do that, we're going to paint this with some rust encapsulator to stop it rusting in the future. Painted that with some silver rust encapsulator. That should be dry tomorrow and ready to fit in the air filter housing. It's the next day and our rust encapsulator is dry. This has come out really nicely. Next up, we're just going to try and screw this to here. We've got number 6 9.5mm screws. These are actually slightly too long, so we've ordered some from Aku, exactly the right length, and there's a little spring washer in there. And as I say, we're going to bend this around the outside to start off with to get it the right shape, and then we're going to try and thread it through. Now I'm going to just gently bend this grill around the outside. It's quite easy to deform this metal, and we want to try and avoid doing that. So if I bend it around to the outside, that'll give us the right profile and a nicer circle. A gentle curve in there, and now I'm going to bend it around the actual air filter to give us a steeper curve. We're pretty much there now. We just need to fit this inside there so that these 2 holes here line up with those 2 holes, and that this threads all the way through there, comes out here and lines up with these holes. To this stage, it should just be a matter of threading this around all the way until these holes line up. Everything's lined up perfectly, and we will be getting a new filter. We just need to fit this to the car now. Often difficult to remember what things looked like before you started refurbishing, but I hope you will agree that is a million times better than the rusty thing we pulled off the car. Now the air filter housing fits in that gap there, and it's a lot harder to fit that in than it actually looks. There are 3 places it attaches. One down here, one up here, and one here on there. Now to get to that fitting there, you basically have to get underneath the car and put the nut on, and that's this fitting here. This top fitting here, the one that sticks out, is the one that attaches on here, and obviously that's a nice easy fitting to get to. Now I'm not actually going to fit this yet because we are going up to the SL shop for the Pagoda Day, and the cheapest place to get these bobbins is the SL shop. These cost about £17 here from Mercedes, and they're about £4 or £5 from the SL shop. So rather than just getting them to post me 1 or 2 and paying the same again in postage, I'll actually go and pick those up myself. So I'm just going to delay putting that in until we get those new parts. Otherwise I'll have to take it all out again, because you do have to remove some of these other pipes and pieces in order to be able to squeeze that in without scratching all the coating off. So I'm going to finish the video here. In the next video, we're either going to fit the rear valance, which is all back from the powder coaters. I'm just waiting for a fuel pump from America before I do that, because it's easier to crawl under the car and fit that without the rear valance on. We're going to be fitting all of the radiator pipes. The pipes are back from the powder coaters. They look amazing, although we had to repair one of them, so I'll be going over how to do that. These hoses here, oh my goodness me. I think we're going to have to replace all the hoses and probably flush the radiator out. We've had the exhaust manifolds back from the powder coaters and we've got all the hardware to fit those. We are actually missing the pipes from the exhaust manifolds to the center section, so we're going to have to buy new ones of those, and boy, they are not cheap for this car. So we've still got plenty to do and plenty of things to spend our money on. Once we've got the air filter sorted, the radiator sorted, and those exhaust manifolds on and the fuel pump, we should be able to set about testing the fuel delivery system on this car and trying to get this running and tune the engine up. We will get those little rubber buffers from the SL shop here. This is the cheapest place I've found, £4.30 including VAT. Now, if you're living in Europe or Germany, you can go along to these guys here, SLS, and they sell those bobbins, but just be very careful. Some of these bobbins have threads on both sides and some are just threaded on one side. For the 1975 280 SL we're doing, the air filter housing actually has this threaded part welded to it, so we need this style here and not the dual style like that. We got the little stainless steel screws and spring washers from this company here, Accu. I've mentioned them before and I'm sure I'll mention them again, but they are really, really good in sending out high quality engineered products really quickly. They've got a system where you can pay them a flat fee, and for 3 months they'll cover all the cost of the postage, which makes it really cost effective to get small quantities for a project that you're doing when you don't know in advance what you may actually need. We use these guys here in Bristol for powder coating and sandblasting, RPA. They've been absolutely excellent, always reasonably priced. Somebody always picks up the phone and answers it, and they get the job done relatively quickly. Definitely worth giving them a call if you've got any powder coating or sandblasting needs. When we've bought this 3M panel bond in the past, we've always got it from eBay, and it's considerably more expensive now than when we last bought it. I think we paid about £40 for a tube, and it's twice as much as that now. Obviously, if you live in America, it's going to be a little bit cheaper. Possibly the way to go is either to buy it in bulk, buy 6 of them, and then sell the other 5 off. Or look out for these little discounts here, 10% off, that's £8 on something that costs £80. My experience is good products are expensive. 3M, the Eastwood products, they do cost considerably more than other brands, but they definitely work and they go on smoothly, and you're only going to do this, or at least you only want to do this job once. So my advice is get the best possible products you can afford.